What's up, guys? Welcome back or welcome to our show called Behind the Mask. I'm Chris, and I'm here, as always, with my buddy Becca. And we have a treat for you guys. Our guest, Sid, is going to introduce herself to you guys. Sid is from Retired College Athletes podcast, Instagram. Check her out. She's presenting some really, really cool and like really helpful stuff. Me and Bex are like obsessed. So hence we were like, we have to have Sid on the show. But Sid, if you want to introduce yourself to the people. That'd be great.
So I am the founder of Retired College Athletes. It's a podcast and platform designed to inspire and inform current and former athletes using stories and advice from retired college athletes. I am a former women's basketball player, played at UVA in Kansas. And along the way, there was a lot I learned that I felt like, you go through the process of being an athlete and there's a lot to unlearn, like we're going to be talking about, but there's just a lot that happens that we all want to kind of unpack after. And then kind of working through what it's like to not really be a competitive athlete, but still be athletic is something that we talk about all the time. And so we have a podcast where we air content on Mondays and Thursdays. And then the Instagram page is just a great community for anybody who is a retired college athlete or interested in that world. And you can come and get involved with us there.
Yeah, awesome. And I know that Bex and I have had many conversations over the content that you guys post on Instagram and even things on the podcast. And yeah, it's perfect to bring us into and continue our Unlearning series, which for people that are new to the series, again, we're talking about exactly what Sid just said, things that we've learned through sport and things that we are trying to navigate in life after sport that we've needed to unlearn, because there's so many things about sport that we do learn that's awesome, that is easily translatable, and things that are kind of questionable, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so today we're breaking down unlearning toxic mindsets. In athlete culture, we know what's the big thing. You got to be mentally tough, quote unquote. You got to have like nerves of steel and have this unshakable mindset that you can just get through anything. And athletes are kind of expected to be perfect robots, so to speak, where nothing kind of shakes you in any way. So we're hoping to unpack some stuff, and we're going to do that through some of these quotes that Bex and I saw that ESPN's Instagram posted of prominent professional athletes saying these quotes. And then we want to talk about what mindset might that be reinforcing and why might that be potentially toxic. So we'll dive right in. So the first one was from Tom Brady. Philly sports fans, I apologize, but it's from Tom Brady. And he said, what ring's my favorite one? My favorite ring is the next one. So Sid, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the first one. What mindset do we think this is reinforcing, and then why might it be potentially problematic?
So the mindset it's reinforcing, in my opinion, is that like the current work that you have already done is not good enough. Like that you can't even settle into the fact that like maybe you've already done a good job, or that you're doing the best you can. I think it, unfortunately, and I think for athletics, I just want to kind of put this general disclaimer. Some of these things are okay in athletics because it's a season, like it's a period of time where you can work towards perfection, quote unquote, for those few weeks. I guess for football, like 18 weeks plus playoffs, but for life, this is not a good thing, because it's like you actually have to learn how to celebrate your wins, like and really sit in them for a while before you're like, okay, let's go on to the next thing. Because if you don't, you'll probably run yourself into the ground. And I feel like that this quote does not create enough space for just celebrating what you're currently doing.
Yeah, love that. Bex, what do you think?
Yeah, I would want to echo Sid on that. I think it almost reinforces the hamster wheel mentality. And again, I think as we look through these quotes, we're not having a conversation with these athletes. We don't necessarily know the context. We don't necessarily know, everything, their thought process behind these comments. But when you pull them out, when you pull out the sentence or the phrase and put it in the context of sports culture and kind of what we know of sports culture and what we're trying to unlearn, dissecting it and realizing that, what does that, for me personally, how does that make me feel when I read that? And I think for me, I was always the athlete that was like, okay, done, on to the next one, done, on to the next one. okay, I hit a home run 205 feet. How can I hit it 215? Like it was just never good enough. And I think, when we hear prominent athletes saying phrases that sound like that, where it reinforces unhealthy habits in our own mind, because we pull them out to fit our framework and our mindset.
Yeah, I would agree with you and 100% think that when he says like my favorite ring is the next one, it's like, dude, you've got 7 rings. At what point do you celebrate at least any of them? And it's interesting, I think, within athlete culture of there's just not a culture of contentment that exists in athlete culture. Like I think there's this unfortunate, like we mix up complacency and contentment so much and think that if I'm just content, I'm going to celebrate this. I played an awesome game today, but I know that I still have work and I know we have a game on Sunday or whatever. Like we're in season, so our games are Thursday, Sunday. We can celebrate the wins that we had on Thursday and still work to get to Sunday. We can still work to better ourselves, but we're able to celebrate this. The thought process might be, oh, so you're just complacent now. Oh, so you're just good with that. And it's like, well, no, I'm aware that this is a process of progression. Like I'm here to continue to better myself, but I don't make or break based off of my performance because I'm able to celebrate when I do well and I'm able to learn from when I don't. And I think the mindset, and this is something every athlete, especially when you're in a championship season of like, yeah, ring chasing, let's go. Of like, we just beat this team that might be ranked whatever in the country. But if we don't win the conference tournament, it's like, well, that was for nothing. And it makes it hard to really celebrate and actually enjoy the process while you're in it. Everybody says trust the process, but the process isn't enjoyable if you can't celebrate while you're in it, I think. And we're
Definitely.
just, yeah. So
I also want to add, like, I think, unfortunately, like you're saying, like, we don't kind of celebrate complacency, but we do celebrate this whole, like, keep going, keep going, keep going. And so I feel like even in these situations, like that is the thing that the media wants to hear. That's the thing that people want to hear. Like, I feel like people rarely celebrate when it's like, if he was to be like, my favorite ring was like this last one, everyone would be like, oh, okay, like what about the other ones? It's like, I mean, those are favorites too. Like, I mean, but like everyone wants to hear the next thing. Like, and we live in a really sensationalized culture or a culture that really likes to sensationalize things. And so perfection is, of course, always sensationalized. And like what we don't have is always sensationalized. And so I could see why he would say that, but also like just as like a former athlete or it gets into the minds of like these younger athletes that are not him, and it becomes toxic.
yeah, for sure. And it brings us to the second quote, which actually is kind of similar. Kobe Bryant said this, which is, I have thoughts on why I think this is interesting, given how we know Kobe lived his life. But it says, friends come and go, but banners hang forever. So what do we think about this one and why might it be problematic?
Gosh, I mean, I love Kobe, but I could not disagree more. Just because it's like, I believe like relationships are always the most important thing. Like always, like you could be the most successful person, the most wealthy, and we've seen it. Like the most wealthy and successful people really not hate their lives because there's not solid relationships there. And so it's interesting because as I look back on my career, some of the successes I've had from USA basketball to like I won a high school championship, and it's like I literally could care less about those things. Like they're great things, and when given the opportunity, I talk about them. But it's like it's really the relationships along the way that made that so much more fun. And those are relationships that I hold today. That like my time at Virginia, some of my best friends came from there, and we weren't necessarily the most successful team coming out of the ACC. Still had a great time. Still have great relationships to come out of that. So I have to like completely disagree because relationships will always be king.
Yeah, 100%. Bex, what do you think?
I think if you could dig deeper into this quote and talk about, sacrifice and how we glorify sacrifice. And again, in some respects, we do need to sacrifice for our sport. But again, I echo Sid's sentiment of my college career ended on March 12th when COVID hit. I don't remember that final, I don't remember anything about that game except for the fact that I was standing beside my teammates, and you look back and, not being able to play your senior season, but being able to have your teammates and your coaches to walk through a really, really challenging season of life together off the field, and again, I think those things are what make sports rich, and they're what make, teams, is the relationships and the people. A team's not a team without the people in it. So again, do I understand how, there's going to be you may miss a family dinner for a tournament at some point in your career? Sure. But I think when we're putting those banners ahead of really cultivating relationships and really leaning into teammates and coaches and, everybody involved in those circles, we miss, I think, the richness of what sport really is and what makes it really awesome.
Yeah, and I would agree with what both of you said. And I feel like as a coach, as a retired athlete, whatever, that the conversations after, when you talk to former teammates that you've played with, is usually not, even if you've won a championship, is not about, oh, dude, check out that trophy that we won. That's not what it is. It's usually like joint commiserating about whatever sprints we ran on some obnoxiously hot day, or some stupid thing we got into when we were traveling in a hotel or whatever. Like, it's all the relational stuff that we did together is always what we remember. And what I think this can also teach young athletes and even athletes in general is almost to treat people like stepping stones to success, rather than like, one, people that you can do life with, and also resources for you to succeed, like people that you get to bring with you as you succeed and elevate. And I think, I would agree with what both of you guys said, is that play at whatever level of finished playing at, getting all the way up, even playing overseas and all that stuff. What I remember the most is the people I got to do it with, positive and negative experiences with people. That's what I remember the most. And a lot of times that these are people that continue your legacy even beyond you, right? Kobe, rest in peace, Kobe. He's not playing anymore, he's not on this earth anymore, but we remember Kobe through the people that were in his life, not through the banners that hang because of his performance. Those things definitely point to like his athletic performance, but we know Kobe is the man he was because of the people that he did life with. So I think it's super important, at least for athletes, like, we don't want to take for granted community because we're chasing a trophy. Like, that trophy is for a moment. Your people are here with you for forever. So yeah, so that's why I think I would 100% agree with you guys and kind of disagree with this frame of thinking. And it could be kind of damaging toward the end if we just go throughout life thinking that we can just do whatever by ourselves. Awesome. So then moving to another, I shouldn't have put these two back to back because this is the debate of Kobe and Michael Jordan, but whatever. It's that his quote is, "I've never lost a game, I just ran out of time." What do we think about this one?
Okay, so I think that there's like so much goodness in failure, like to be able to say like I did not reach the goal, and then to be able to turn around and actually reach a goal. I think there's so much goodness in that. Even just looking back at Michael Jordan's career, the reason why we love him so much is because there was some conflict in his story. Like, it'd be so different if it was like, yeah, Michael Jordan made his varsity team, and then he made it to North Carolina, was wonderful, and then went to the Bulls and was wonderful, and like everything was great. Like, it's just such a like annoyingly like just such a like terrible story, just very annoying and like not relatable. And so I think like being able to sit in failure and not saying like, I appreciate the whole like betting on yourself part of it, of like, I ran out of time, like I would have been fine. And I think there's like some health to that. Like, I think as an athlete, you almost need a little bit of that. But I think there's a lot of power in just being like, hey, I missed the mark and it'll be better next time. So that when next time does come, it's a much better story. It's much more relatable. I think you actually have a chance to impact a lot more people with that kind of story than just being like, kind of almost like an excuse of like, if I just had more time. It's like, well, you didn't. So you know, like, I guess you missed the mark. And this is like, I mean, I'm talking about Jordan, like amazing, right? But he's amazing. But I just think it's like taking ownership of what has happened is really important.
Yeah, can't agree with you more. And I think it puts a little bit more control into your hands if you just say, I lost. That means I get to learn versus I ran out of time, because you don't have any control over that. You ran out of time. That's the game. It's just what happens. And it's like, okay, but what do I need to do to get better? Make the game longer? Well, you can't. So like being able to, I 100% agree with you, Sid, of normalizing failure being the way to success versus failure being something we want to avoid to get to success. It's like those two things aren't mutually exclusive. You have to fail to get to this. You can't, nobody just was born that way. Jordan was just born that way. And that's something I 100% agree with you, that in his story of getting cut from this and this and this and this and all these things, that's what makes him more relatable. And even any athlete, when you're trying to go and encourage and motivate young athletes to get to things, if you're just good at everything, that's the standard. And if they, especially, you know, if you're somebody who might not be naturally great at that sport, if the standard is, oh, I was just good at this, then they're less inclined to want to listen to that story. They're less inclined to want to use that story as a means to motivate. And Bex, we've talked about this on the pod before about not faking perfection, because then that provides an inaccurate standard. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this quote too, because I know you've got a lot of things to say about it.
So this was my favorite quote growing up as a young athlete, and I'm glad we're having it on here. What I loved about this quote growing up is it was relentless, but again, it was also, for me as a young athlete, I was very much a perfectionist, and I very much put my identity in whether I won or lost. So to say, you know, I didn't lose, I ran out of time. You know, I would have figured it out. I was working towards it, and, you know, the chips just didn't fall. And I think in some ways that was helpful for me, because it normalized, you know what, sometimes the chips just don't fall. Sometimes you can be working really, really hard and the clock runs out on you. And like, but to your guys' point, I think it's like the other end of the other side of the coin of, it's actually okay if you failed. You know, it's okay if you lost. And I think, you know, for me as a young athlete, losing was not okay. Failing was not okay. So I loved the idea of, well, it's never failing. I just run out of time. I run out of practice time. I run out of game time. When in reality, you know, like, I'll just echo what you guys are saying and leave it at that of, it's okay to fail, and it's healthy to fail, and to take ownership of those failures and to learn from them. Yes, be relentless. Yes, continue to compete as if you were gonna take the game and win. And then take ownership when it doesn't work out, and the things that could have gone differently that you had control over.
Yeah, really good, for sure. So moving on to the next one, by a tennis player whose name I don't want to butcher. So I'm just not even going to say it. But she was quoted and said, "Whoever said it's not whether you win or lose that counts probably lost." I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. This quote is so fifth grade, elementary, like kids on the kickball court to me. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this quote.
Becca, do you want to go first?
This quote makes me kind of sad, like, not gonna lie. Again, I don't know the context. I don't know this athlete. I don't know them at all. For me, if I'm hearing that, if I heard a coach or if I heard a teammate or someone say that to me, I think, again, it idolizes victory and it idolizes winning, making it out to be everything, when in reality, you know, life is just not that way. So there are going to be times in life as an athlete and as a retired athlete that we fail, that we miss the mark, that, you know, things don't go our way and life goes on. And I think that's really healthy to normalize in sport. You know, the sun, one of my favorite quotes is, the sun's going to rise and we're going to try again tomorrow. Like, so the idea that, you know, whoever said winning wasn't everything obviously lost. You know, it's maybe the person who said that had learned the lesson that winning wasn't everything, you know, and I just think we need to normalize the idea of loss and failure, because when it comes, then it's a part of life, and it's a part of being an imperfect human. And it's not, wow, there's something wrong with me that I failed, you know, and it doesn't go, we don't self-destruct, we can self-reflect and make moves to be better next time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think like reframing failure is super important. It's interesting. I've been doing a lot of research on successful people that I admire, and it's like they all have a really healthy view of failure, to the point where one of them, like her growing up in her household, her dad was like, "Did you fail today?" And if she said no, he was like, "Oh my gosh, like please, like I need a story of like failure," because it was just like one of those things where it's okay. And I think this quote doesn't leave room for that, like you were saying, Becca. It's just, it's okay to fail. It's also like, you can tell just like from the quote that she was never given the opportunity to think that way, because clearly it's not even okay. And I think at an elite level, sometimes I think like something that has been a conversation, at least on RCA, is that some of the things that make you great in sports don't translate into real life, into the rest of your life. And so maybe this is like a quote that works for her. It would never work for me, but like, this is the quote that works for her in her career. But I promise you, if you bring that into your life, it's not going to be good in generally in your life, because it's like, usually often like in life, we dance in the gray. There's not always like some you win and someone else has to lose, or you're right and someone is like completely wrong. It's kind of like there are two ways to get to the right answer, or like we can both kind of be winning together. And so I think like creating more space for this conversation on failure, it was just generally helpful, because I think the biggest thing is you won't always be an athlete. And so helping athletes frame these things so that it will work in sport as well as in life is super important.
Yeah. And I love what you just said, of not necessarily everything that worked for you in sport translates to things out of sport, especially I think in particular, if you're moving into a context in which sport is just not the dominant thing. So like, I'm a coach. So certain things like this phrase, of course, is deeply problematic and would never say it's one of my athletes. But if I did, it would probably be widely acceptable, because I still work within the context of sport. But if I were to move like into psychology, for example, Bex, you and I, like, if we were to imagine, come in, your client's like, oh yeah, you know, this happened and I really struggled with that. And we're like, well, you know, it's not whether you win or you probably lost, if whatever, like what, that would have made no sense. That would be massively, like I'd probably just get fired on the spot, because there's also no room for empathy in that statement, like at all. And it's like, sure, winning and losing in the context of sport, like the picture of this tennis player is like right at the end of what I think is either the US Open or the Wimbledon final. So it probably makes sense to get her to where she was at, that, oh yeah, I have to have a winning at all costs attitude to get there. But it's just not generalizable in any other context except for sport, or except for just like other areas in which you're an elite performer. Like I'm thinking like in terms of musicians and artists and actors and actresses and stuff like that. And I love what you were saying, instead of so much of the rest of our human experience operates in the gray, and athlete culture definitely doesn't teach us how to win together. Definitely not. You're either a winner or you're a loser. We can't all win together. And that's a different discussion for another day. But I do think that that is such a good point as related to this, and segues us to the next one that we just know is problematic, from Tiger Woods. And his quote says, winning solves everything. What do we think about this?
Yeah. So, as someone who works in journalism, I think, well, I don't know where this like, where he was in his life at this point or when this was being asked, but it's like I feel like this is often something that would be used to brush off the media, because it's like if you're winning, the media will be nice to you. Like have nothing but good things to say. They'll leave you alone. If you're losing, they come up with like some random stuff. They're always in your business about like why you might be losing. We had this whole conversation, kind of narrative going with Naomi Osaka and how she was like, I'm not going to the press because it's like you guys are ruining my mental health over like winning and losing. And so I think there's a lot of like grace and space for that conversation. But in terms of like what exactly is the quote again? It was like
winning solves everything.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not. I just think like I think the Players Tribune a while ago had a story run on Ben Gordon. He was a basketball player for the Celtics and successful, highly successful, but winning did not solve everything. He ended up having a lot of like mental health issues and just life crises, and winning is like, I think it's a great cover up for what is actually going on in your life. Like that can be going so well, but at the same time, as we talk about athletics and the sacrifice necessary, sometimes all those things are happening in the background are covered up when you're winning. And so it's like often I've seen people winning who have more issues than people who are losing or not, seen as less successful. And so at that point in time, my question is like, are you even really winning if the rest of your life is in turmoil?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think about outside of athlete context of what the definition of success is in a individualistic and kind of materialistic culture compared to more collectivist cultures, right? In the United States versus some even like third world countries and other places too. The measure of happiness is different in one culture versus another. So you might have everything, quote unquote, money, house, all of these things, and still our depression rates are at an all-time high. It's like ridiculous. And then go somewhere else and you see people that are perfectly content and are perfectly happy and are able to experience joy when they don't have quite as much materially as maybe those in the US have. And I think as it relates to athlete culture too, one, we know that winning doesn't solve everything. It never does. And I think a lot of times 100% is a means to brush off the media and as a means to just distract away from the hard work that needs to get done within team culture. Like I see it in some teams I've coached and in some teams I've been on, where it's like, let's just win. Every time we win, it's just a convenient way for us to continue to push off this conversation about the fact that this kid has beef with this kid and they're not passing the ball to them in a game. Well, we won, so it's not a big deal. It is, though, because team morale and team cohesion and things like that are kind of important. So, yeah, I definitely think it can be like a Band-Aid for us to avoid having real talk discussions for sure. Bex, what are your thoughts?
I think something that is continually coming up for me, just hearing you guys talk, is what's our end goal of athletics? Are we building athletes or are we building people? And I think we have to ask ourselves those questions when mindsets like this come up, and when Chris, like you're saying, like, well, like, let's just go win. Like everybody's frustrated, everybody's mad. It's the end of the season. We've been together all year. Like, let's just go win. And well, in reality, like if we're going to be dynamic athletes, if we're going to be able to problem solve on the field, on the court, and then outside of it, we have to be able to problem solve interpersonally, which is a whole nother conversation. But my point being, I think to say it solves everything, I think it solves, truth be told, it solves a lot in the very vacuum packed context of I work really hard and I feel good when it all pays off. But there's a whole lot of other things to parse out in there that I don't think we take into account what it means to be an athlete, what it means to be involved in sports, and the personhood and the humanity of athletics. I don't think the quote allows space for that, to use Sid's terminology of. I just think there's more, it's more dynamic than that.
For sure. So then our last quote by another GOAT, which is Muhammad Ali, said, "I don't count my sit-ups. I only start counting when it starts hurting."
Oh man. Yeah. It's interesting because it's like when I first read this quote, in my head, I'm like, this is such a tweetable. Like it's like we live in a culture where like everyone's looking for that tweetable phrase. Granted, then you look at who said it and you're like, oh, there was not really Twitter at this time. So it's not a tweetable. But um yeah, I'm a big proponent of like all the work counts. Like when you talk about, I think the thing about this that gets me, and it's not necessarily like it's kind of there's so many things I find problematic about this, but the one that I don't like is we are like the sum of all of our work, all of our decisions. So I think like this is a big conversation in the in a dietitian's world or in the dietary world where people are on these diets and they're like, oh, I messed up today, like this is terrible. And it's like, well, in reality, you are the sum of like all the days of your eating, not just today. So if you ate a lot today, your body's smart enough to realize, oh, I probably don't need that much tomorrow, you know, like, and you are the sum of all of that. Here, that doesn't actually give you the opportunity to like count all of your work. And I think that that's super important. The other part of it is that, oh man, like the pain part, like why does it only have to count when it's painful? I think, I mean, I just feel like it doesn't leave enough room for the opportunity for you to realize, like, again, all of your work counts, whether it's painful or not. And if you continue to get stronger and it gets less painful, does that mean that you have to double your work, triple your work? Like, it's just not a good formula to me for consistent success.
Yeah, I 100% agree. To me, this is a recipe for injury. Like this just screams you are going to get hurt. And I think, and Bex, we've talked about this when it comes to like watching all the fails of like CrossFitters doing way too much weight and refusing to just bail. It's such like, it doesn't have to hurt. And I think we talked about this in the episode with Jordan, and unlearning productivity and things like that. And then we talked about it with Marissa too, in that episode of unlearning different expectations of your body, of ignoring, we're taught to just ignore discomfort and pain as a means to get to success. And it's like, it doesn't have to hurt. So the reason why this popped into my head is I have a bunch of friends with our like Whoop bracelets on, and it tells you when you're at high strain. And one of my friends was like super transparent in the summer and was like, hey, honestly, I'm just trying really hard not to chase high strain, because that's what she does, is like do everything until her body tells her she can't, pretty much, or her body just falls apart. So I think, yeah, this is 100% a classic recipe for overtraining and for getting injured, when you're always doing things to push your body to beyond the max and refusing to like listen to your body in the first place, which you need it to play. So you probably should listen to it. That's a concept, but yeah, I just think it's so interesting. And there's a pride aspect that goes in there with an athlete culture of us being unwilling to appear weak, of like, we just got to keep doing it. We got to keep going. It hurts, but it hurts. That must mean it's working. Like, you're doing the work, so it's working. It doesn't have to hurt, but yeah. Bex, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. For sure, you're laughing, so I'm excited to hear about it.
Once again, I loved this quote as a young athlete. I don't like it now. It also reminds me of the quote, another one of my childhood favorites. Pain is weakness leaving the body. I saw that on, I don't know where I was. I saw that on a shirt not too long ago. Like somebody was wearing it on their shirt. Anyway, but I think I loved this quote as a young athlete. First of all, because I was young and I thought, okay, well, if professionals are saying this, this must be how it goes. But the idea of, and Chris, we've talked about this, seeing our bodies and truthfully seeing our minds and our personhood as an athlete as nothing more than a machine. and you kind of whip the machine into shape. And when it hurts, that means it's good because you're making the machine stronger. When in reality, in a lot of ways, you could really be breaking down the machine, which is not a machine at all. But I think, as a young athlete who wants to push and wants to kind of reach, the best that they can be, when I'll use myself as an example. When I heard this, I was like, okay, pain equals productivity. And unlearning that has been a process. And, we just had this conversation of how do I respect my body as an athlete, as a person, rather than seeing it as a machine and a means to an end. And I think that's a whole nother conversation, but this quote in particular, I know for me in those struggles, this quote in particular fueled that, because it fueled the mindset of, okay, pain equals productivity and productivity equals success.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the last thing I'll say to this before we kind of wrap up and ask this last question, and this is a PSA to athletes everywhere, in particular, when you go in the weight room, you have a regiment that's there. If your strength coach is doing their job for a reason, it doesn't have to hurt for that to mean that you got a good lift in or you got a good workout in. I think so much, Bex, you may or may not agree with this, somebody who loves to lift heavy weight and throw weight around everywhere, like if it wasn't a struggle where it almost felt like I was going to drop it on the top of my head, people would be like, well, you got to add more. And it's like, I don't today, actually. That's not helping me right now. But I think even sometimes this is where it doesn't leave us room to talk about rest either, because it's like, if it's not hurting, I don't count it. Well, I'm not hurting when I'm resting, or at least I'm not supposed to if I'm doing it right. So does rest not count either? But if you think about professional athletes, so much time is spent on rest and recovery. They go do cryo tanks and they go do this and they go do this. Tom Brady has a personal massage therapist. Like it was in that Facebook Watch like documentary thing or something that he posted. So if it doesn't hurt, then it doesn't count. Then that means we don't rest either, which like, I feel like it's not only a recipe for injury, but also for burnout too, of just like, oh, and it takes away the enjoyment of sport. Like it's supposed to be fun. It doesn't have to hurt all the time, for sure. So I think to kind of wrap us up, the last question I have for both of you is, so we talked about a bunch of kind of toxic and unhealthy problematic mindsets from these quotes that we see a bunch in athlete culture. What are some characteristics that might make up a healthy mindset for athletes? And then how can coaches kind of reinforce those things?
I think the easiest way for me to talk about what makes up a healthy mindset is to talk about what it's not. And so I think the biggest thing that I see from all of the interviews that I've done is striving for perfection will equal an unhealthy mindset, because it's not attainable. Like even if you were to put language to what perfection looks like, you really can't. Like I remember when I was younger, I'd say like, oh, I want to be the best. And it's like, well, how would you know when you got there? And so kind of like trying to strive after something that's really elusive is not healthy. And then the other part of it is like, while sports is kind of built for comparison, like you need to be better than the person next to you, I think it's healthier to try and do that less and probably put the comparison more so on yourself. So in my opinion, even if you're on a team sport, how you get better is being better than you were the day before, but that's you, not the person next to you. So it's like, okay, if I couldn't do this skill yesterday, by next week, I want to be able to do that skill. If I can do that, well, I'm comparing to myself, not like my teammate who I need to be better than for the spot. I think over time you will be fine and you'll get you'll get to where you need to go. But I think that's just a healthier way to frame things, where if comparison is necessary, compare to yourself. And I think those two things I think will help in a healthier mindset. But in terms of coaching, my thoughts on coaching is coaches just need to know their personnel. Like I think that was a huge thing for basketball. That's like a phrase that we say all the time, where it's like, know your personnel, know who's on the floor. Like, how do you pass them the ball? What do they like? Things like that. Know your kids. These quotes may work for some kids. I promise you it won't work for all of them. Like Some kids are intrinsically motivated and they just need to know that you care and they'll run through a wall for you. Other kids need this kind of stuff. Other kids just like, yeah, I mean, it's just everyone's different. And I think also not like, as we talked about as I just talked about comparison, it's just like, don't pin your kids up against each other. I think that that's probably the best way to create a toxic team environment. And so between those two things, I think those are like the best pieces of advice I could give to coaches around creating a healthy mindset for their team.
Yeah, so good. And if I could add something about the coaches, I 100% agree with what you said. Sid, if I could add something with the coaches, it's, can we create a psychologically safe environment where failure is encouraged? So like you were talking about your friend whose dad said, hey, did you fail today? Like coaches. And I see it so much with, they're like, they have to mess up. They have to mess up. I'm like, yeah, but your messaging is making it seem like they can't. They don't feel like if they make a mistake, that you're going to say it's okay. Instead, you're going to sensationalize it, throw a temper tantrum and be like, oh my gosh, why did you do that? That's not every coach, but that's just happens to be a lot of the coaches that I work with. So I think, yeah, creating an environment where failure is encouraged and failure is okay. And athletes know that it's not going to make or break how much playing time they get. That's not the reason why. And then on top of that, being able to celebrate. So we were talking about celebrating failure and celebrating the process. Can we not just gas up the athletes that made that amazing play in training or on a game day or whatever, but can we also like gas up the athletes who had some improvement on a day-to-day? I think in working with individuals, when I've trained goalkeepers, we spend less time cheering when they make saves and more time cheering when they finally made that small improvement of coaching, like of feedback that we've been giving the whole time. They might have still got scored on. The outcome hasn't changed, but now there's progression. Now you're stepping to the ball versus just falling. You still got scored on, but now you're stepping. So I think that's something it's difficult in a coaching aspect because we're so outcome driven, but we got to practice what we preach a little bit and actually celebrate when kids make small gains and small wins along the way to the process, and then just treat the outcome like it's a byproduct. So we do everything right, we get there, versus saying we need to be here today. It's like, okay, but you got to teach me how to get there versus just tell me what to do. But Bex, what are your thoughts?
I think this is probably my psychology brain, but I always I ask so many why questions. And I think we're always going to have input like this. We're going to follow ESPN. We're going to follow, and again, like Sid was saying, sometimes these quotes, sometimes somebody can twist this into something that's healthy and productive. Certainly not everybody can do that. I certainly could not, even though they were my favorite quotes. And I think understanding that, but also understanding taking an input, taking these quotes, whatever it may be, understanding that the person who spoke them is also human and also doesn't have it all figured out. I think we idolize and we glorify people on platforms naturally as humans, but we also have to realize that they're people with struggles just like us. So just like we're not right all the time, they're not right all the time. And then asking ourselves the why questions. Why was this quote particularly motivating to me? Why? What's my motivation behind it? What's my motivation behind being the best? And that self-awareness, that self-reflection, I don't think is necessarily natural. And I think that's where a coach can come into play, of potentially seeing the action, seeing a kid who's pushing really, really, really hard in the weight room. And naturally, maybe our first response as a coach is like, wow, that's awesome, let's praise it. But maybe a productive response to that would be pulling that kid aside, or in the next one-on-one session being like, hey, I saw you pushing really hard, tell me about that. What's your motivation behind that? And seeing if we're coming from a healthy place, or seeing if we're coming from, more of a toxic mindset that we need to unlearn a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I think, a lot of these are, coaches, Bex, we've talked about this before. Coaches are just older versions of their athletes. So a lot of this is coaches unlearning too, along with the athlete, and being able to process through all of that together, and just like creating an environment where you can be transparent and where athletes are encouraged to be weak, so to speak, which really just means not perfect. Like Sid said a bunch of times, I think that's the overwhelming like takeaway I have from this conversation is the athlete immediately, and I'm just going to echo what Sid said, the culture becomes toxic when perfection is the definition of success, versus when it's like, let's just have fun and progress today. I've never been on the team with people who didn't play well while they were having fun. We all know it. And yet in athletics, it's like, we got to grind it out today. And I'm like, yeah, but it's fun when we compete and we're getting better while we're having fun. So yeah, but we are out of time. So I want to, again, Sid, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, joining us, sharing your insight and your wisdom with us. It's been awesome to learn from you and to hear from you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being on here. I love the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, awesome. So you guys, that's a wrap for this episode. We, again, as always, if you guys like what you're seeing and you're watching on YouTube, follow us, hit the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Follow us on Instagram at Behind the Mask 3132. Podcasts are all at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Please go check out Sid's stuff at RCA. Again, retired college athletes. Whether you're a current athlete, it's stuff you should know anyway, or you're a retired athlete, stuff you should definitely know. And if you're a coach, also stuff you should know. So important, and so much wisdom and good work that they're doing over there, and we can't plug in enough. And you guys are going to see us plug it about 1 million times on our Instagram. So Sid, thanks again for popping on. Bex, it's always a pleasure to be on here with you.
My last point, I want to get Sid's quote about the perfectionism and the mindset. Can we get that on a shirt replacing the pain is weakness leaving the body? Like, let's
Yes.
swap those. So good.
I'm here for it.
We should make it happen. We should actually do that.
Yeah, let's get some stuff up in here. Some apparel.
I'm hearing
a word for apparel.
Merch.
Some merch.
I'm hearing a collab.
All and when we see somebody wearing a shirt like that, we can just hand it. Hey, try this shirt on. I have a better one. I'll trade you.
This one fits better. I think it looks better on you. The saying's better too, so like
trading jerseys, we're just gonna give you a shirt that's more productive and healthier for you. That's hilarious. Awesome. Well, yeah, you guys, we're out of time. So until next time, we'll catch you guys later on the pod.
See you guys.